Welcome to the Scifi and Fantasy Show's Thrawn and On and On.
We're at the Star Wars Cantina. Strangest creature Shaun's ever seen. At the Star Wars Cantina. Music and blasters and old Jedi masters at the Star Wars Cantina.
This is ridiculous, Daniel. Yeah.
I try.
I mean, now you're setting a precedent that every episode that you're on with me has to begin as a musical.
It has to have a musical number somewhere in it.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, okay, guys. Well, after 6 years as in hiatus, we're bringing back the Star Wars-themed edition of Reading Rangers called Thrawn and On and On. This is episode 7 of that show. We are going to be talking about specifically this little book. I don't know why I'm showing it. It's literally on the screen, and if you're on a podcast, you can't see it. That book is called Tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina, edited by longtime Star Wars writer Kevin J. Anderson. This is from 1995. We are on the old canon cycle at this point, but if we do another episode, we'll be on new canon. But that's where we are for now. So we're doing this book. Again, I keep showing it even though it's literally up there for everybody to see and people at home can't see what I'm showing you. So I'm holding a book, guys. I don't know what to tell you.
It's a fine book. And there's illustrations within it, too.
There are.
Yes. All right. So this being an anthology, there's not exactly like a plot synopsis that we can give for this as one would normally do. So perhaps, Shaun, you could just give like a rundown on the background or concept of this, which is the first entry of Anderson's Tales anthologies that are now in the Star Wars Legends collection.
Yeah. So there's like a bounty hunters one, which I've also read, which is kind of fun. This is like a Star Wars obsession with filling in the gaps of things the films don't even bother to do, which is part of what makes them great, which is they give you a scene. It's got a whole bunch of characters in it. They tell you nothing about them other than what they look like and maybe vaguely what they're doing. And so then they make a book that says, well, let's tell some of those stories. Every single character in this book, with one exception that I'm aware of, appears in the Mos Eisley Cantina scene in the first Star Wars movie, A New Hope, Episode 4. So you get here a wide range of stories by a fairly wide range of different authors, some of whom are still writing pretty significantly today. And you get a lot of different writing styles. As far as Star Wars is going to give you, there's a little bit of some creativity happening here. You get everybody from like Kathy Tyers, Timothy Zahn, A.C. Crispin, Dave Wolverton. Barbara Hambly is in this book. You get, obviously, Kevin J. Anderson. I don't know how he edited himself, but, you do you, buddy. Jennifer Robeson, and a handful of others that I think would be more significant at the time this book came out, but maybe a little bit less so today, which is not necessarily their fault. And so, yeah, you get a lot of different types of stories here. And I really want to say types, because we get everything from kind of bog standard Star Wars type story to really uncomfortable stories to, like, I think pretty subtly told and really interesting stories. You get kind of straight adventure. You get stories about very creepy things. You get love stories. You get very creepy love stories. You get, we're going to talk about the creepy love story. You get, stories of smugglers and stories of like creepy sort of vampire dudes and, weird characters who are literally like a blip. They show up maybe for 1 second and we get very interesting versions of their pasts and histories. And I think overall it's... Oh, and from both sides of the aisle, right? We get both people who want nothing to do with the galactic conflict that's brewing, people that are a part of the rebellion, people that are part of the Empire, people who maybe were part of one side of that conflict but then don't want to be anymore. people who are opportunists, people whose story we actually get to see repeatedly told over and over because they're almost in every single story dying. Yeah. And so, yeah, it's a very interesting book. It's an interesting concept for a book. It also has its, and I guess this is where we get to general reactions, it has its issues, which is it is a book that, at best, tells a very good story, and at worst, tells a story that you'll probably forget because some of these stories are just not that interesting. It also does the problem Star Wars commits a lot, which is, hey, how much can we mine and drag out these gaps that we're going to fill in? And I think part of the problem Star Wars sometimes had is it's actually more interesting for some of these characters to not have gaps filled in. And because the story we get is just frankly not that compelling. I'm sorry to say. I like this book overall, but it is, at times, you just kind of go, well, that one was a dud.
Or reading or watching the movie, you imagine different stories for the characters.
That's true.
And then reading this, it's kind of like, okay, that's a valid take, sure, but I like my idea maybe better.
Yeah, I think to give you a really good example of this, in Star Wars fandom, right, there's so much fan attachment to a very particular version of the story that is told 14 separate times in here, which is the Han Solo shooting Greedo scene. Here, Han shoots first. I want to be clear. He repeatedly shoots first in this. And so, Lucas, go to hell. Han shot first, you bastard. But I think part of the thing is that in the movie, right, we don't know anything about Greedo's backstory. We don't know his age. We don't know where he's from. We know he's a Rodian because later we find out where Rodians are. But at that time, all we know is here's this guy attacking what we think is one of the main characters of the story. He's kind of aggressive, maybe because Han Solo's a bad guy, which is also part of the story. And then he gets basically blasted and he dies. And you get that here in almost every story, some of them in more detail than others. And then you also get Greedo's story. And so it changes, I think, if I read this and I treat this as canon, I have a very different feeling about Greedo. I actually feel bad for Greedo. Not least of all because he dies 14 freaking times in this book, right? And so poor Greedo, but also the story about Greedo makes you realize he's actually somewhat of a sympathetic character. Yeah, it's a tragedy. He's murdered by his own people, by the way. We'll get to that. And so I think that changes things a little bit too, because then Han Solo comes a bit less heroic, I guess. Rough around the edges hero who will kill people, but more he was sort of goaded into, not by his own fault, basically murdering somebody who is just a kind of a punk kid, basically, who comes from a rough background. Anyway, we'll get to it. So that's part of what I think is going on, though, is everyone has their own vision in their head of who Greedo really is. He's this bounty hunter. Some people think he's really good and all of this, and just Han Solo is just better. And this changes that, because if you take this as canon, you can't keep that story in your head anymore.
Yet on the flip side, we also get other parts of the Cantina scene told again and again.
Yes.
From different points of view, but basically all showing the same thing, of Dr. Evazan and Ponda Baba.
Yeah.
And I don't know as it really adds anything.
Oh, you mean you're talking
Greedo? The Greedo definitely does, but
yeah, you're talking about the Dr. Death, who I'm 112 systems. Yeah, you'll be dead.
And Obi-Wan, chopping off Walrus Man's arm.
Yeah. Which is a fun scene. I will just say that story in particular, Dr. Death, is very, very creepy, and also a great example of a character who I don't know if we don't care when he dies because he's a monster. If anything, it makes it seem less like. So there's another story, I can't remember which one, right? Which is from another point of view character who suggests that, oh, well, they're just posturing, right? And so it's all a lot of posture. They're like, look at me, rough and tumble. I'm so strong, right? And so from that perspective, you go, oh, okay, well, they're in like this backwater world where it's sort of very old westy. You kind of have to be strong and make yourself seem strong. And while you don't really feel bad that the guy gets his arm cut off and, you know, all that stuff, you sort of go, but it kind of makes sense in this context. They're participating in almost like a masculine ritual, if you will. And then once we learn who he is, it's like, oh, well, maybe he should have got killed in this scene, not the walrus head guy, because he actually isn't the Dr. Death, right? The guy with the crazy face that goes, I'm wanted in 12 systems, you'll be dead. That guy. He's a monster. He's like experimenting on people and chopping them up and doing horrible things, and then he dies at the end. And it's sort of like, but what did we gain here?
Right.
I mean, I really don't know, because I don't care about the character. Is it the sort of like that sort of cathartic feel where we want to watch a villain die, but then he doesn't even die technically by the hand of a hero. He dies by the hand of a corrupt senator who's been paying for all his experiments and is just now finding out just how effed up the experiments are. And so you don't even really care about the senator. He's also kind of a turd. I don't know. There are stories like that in here, you know. Yeah.
I kind of wish that story had just gone more into it. It didn't work well as a short story.
It doesn't work well as a short story.
It needed more, and I actually could see it being like cast as a Hammer horror movie, where you had like actor that plays Tarkin.
Oh, Cushing.
Why am I blanking? Peter Cushing. Like Peter Cushing playing that character, I could totally see, because it is a Frankenstein-like character. So similar to like what Cushing did in the Hammer horror movies.
Yeah. Well,
there's something there, but that story just ended up being not enough.
Well, Star Wars has curiously dabbled with horror, but the problem with Star Wars is I think expanded universe, they sort of admit that for the most part, it's going to be older readers that read that stuff, except the stuff obviously directly written for children and for young readers. But the reality is that Star Wars is a franchise that historically has revitalized its fan base by adding a new generation, right? The films have crossed 3 different generations at this point. And so, you know, it's one thing to have like Anakin Skywalker implied to murder a bunch of children. It's another to watch him chop down children visibly and graphically. That's horrific. Right. And Dr. Death is gruesome, like very, very gruesome. There's a lot of murder in this book, to be clear. I mean, what would you expect? It's Mos Eisley, of course, right? But there's stories in here that I just think that it's hard for Star Wars to effectively do, because horror in Star Wars like almost crosses a line of there's stories in here that like are not friendly for kids. That like 11. I wouldn't let my kid read that story about Dr. Death. There's no way. He's 11. There's absolutely not. He's not ready for it, right? And so I think that it's interesting to think of Star Wars as being a franchise that likes horror, but a lot of time when we get horror, it's sort of obvious homages to like classic horror. So in the Clone Wars, for example, and then there's also a Stormtrooper zombie, but they're basically various zombie-like stories where creatures are like taken over and they become mindless and they just want to like kill you. But they don't spend a lot of time on the graphic detail, and that still feels removed enough from like a character who's literally like cutting up people's family members in gruesome experiment, because he is, as you say, a Dr. Frankenstein, except he's like a more horrifying Dr. Frankenstein.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he does literally Frankenstein a character, right? There's like a cobbled together monster in a formaldehyde jar at one point. Not jar, tank. Yeah. Anyway. Do we want? How are we doing this? Are we gonna go like story to story? Or are we just gonna like wander
randomly
through? We're just randomly. I don't know.
Well, general impressions. If we want to start there, like you've kind of touched on something with me that kind of makes me love/hate this.
Sure.
As a concept, because as I started reading this, I had never read much of the what is now Legends novels. I read Zahn's original trilogy. That's really about like a smattering of things here and there. And that's about it, even though I had them sitting on my shelf. And so reading these tales was exciting for me that I finally had the opportunity. And as I began reading, I was like, my God, Solo was not the first movie to do this so terribly. Of not everybody needs a backstory.
Yes.
Not everyone needs to have a silly name.
Yeah.
That then also tries to tie everything together. Not everyone has to have a direct connection to the battle plans or a top secret weapon that's on the Death Star, right? It can be an isolated story that has no connection whatsoever to anything else other than that one moment in the cantina. But they try to weave things together and try to put in Easter eggs, try to make a relevance that is unnecessary to me. And so, yes, I liked a lot of the stories, but it surprised me and sort of infuriated me that early in Star Wars. I mean, I guess 95 or whatever it was wasn't really early, given when the movies originally came out.
Yeah.
But the idea that the expanded universe was already so early in the books, I guess, doing this disappointed me somewhat.
Yeah, I think I would agree. It's an issue of there's this thing where it's in a galaxy far, far away, and we know that the galaxy is quite big and quite vast. You know, maybe not quite as vast as we do now, but you know, at the time of this book coming out. But there's this like element of, you know, the universe is vast, and look at all these alien peoples, and they come from all these different worlds. But also, isn't the galaxy weirdly very small, because everything seems connected, and so
because they're all running into each other on multiple days on this planet.
So I think I'm not against per se the whole Greedo like the cantina scene appearing in all of them. I appreciate that some of the stories don't bother doing the whole let me describe it in detail from this character's perspective, because it's like once you're like 8 stories in, you're like, I've seen this. Okay, move on.
I'm tired of this. Yeah,
but I kind of feel like that should be the main connection tissue is the cantina scene. And then every character doesn't need to have some connection to the larger galactic. I mean, some of them don't, but so many of them in this book do. And I think that makes the universe so much more small. And especially since some of the stories that are told here that make those connections are doing so in a way that I don't find meaningful. Either for the character or for the larger universe. And it's sort of, you know, like, oh, here's the thing where isn't it connected and isn't that neat? And it's like, okay, but what real value is offered here? Is it just making me think about, you know, those stories we've already seen, but it isn't really contributing anything super meaningful? Like there are 2 stories in here that both reference the second Death Star, one referring to the weapon system, and then one that I will actually say is one of my favorites in this book, which is One Last Night in Mos Eisley, The Tale of the Wolfman and the Lamproid, which it takes place jumping, sort of doing some weird timey-wimey force ? Mind things of the last moments of the Wolfman, who's from the story, Lax Zivrak, who is basically going to his death at the Battle of Endor and is remembering his life at various points, and very specifically his love for Dice Ibagon, who is a lamproid who he fell in love with and became part of the rebellion with her. And it's his relationship to her. And I think that one, we go, oh, this is a very personal story about somebody who isn't a main character that is in so many of the major climactic moments. And it's about his deep, deep, deep appreciation of love of this person, but also the pain and the struggle that he goes through, and doing something interesting with a character that we're supposed to think of as frightening, who is anything but. Right? He's a wolfman. We're supposed to think he's terrifying. He's going to eat your kids, all of these, because certainly that was what they were going with for, right? And I love that they take his character and say, no, he's actually kind of a softy deep down. He doesn't want to be doing this. Yeah. You know, he doesn't want to be fighting. He wants to love, but he also realizes, like, I can't not fight because, you know, that this is necessary. We're saving lives. and he loves this woman, Dice, to bits, but there's something greater than them that he must participate in. But you could just see if he survived this, like he retires to like a world with her, like they make a bunch of little babies and they like have a farm and they're just being adorable. So because he's a softie, he's basically a like wolf teddy bear, and I love that
their love exists outside of time.
It does also exist outside of time.
Which is just
the implication at the end of that story is that maybe they've become one with the Force and are together forever, which is a little silly, but also I don't care because it's super adorable. And
it's done really, really well.
Yes,
and so that story is by Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens, who I know far more from their Star Trek novels.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if they've written anything else for Star Wars offhand, but they've written a ton for Star Trek. And that was a stellar way of ending the collection. And it's the example of where I like this as a concept when it's done well.
Yes.
And not done as sort of like a novelty act. And some of them seem to go more of the gee whiz kind of, isn't it fun to make these connections? And isn't it gee whiz? Isn't you thought this person was like this? Well, actually they're like this. And they take it, that last story in particular is one that takes it much more seriously and does something interesting with it. So when it is done well, like anything, when it's done well, it works really great.
I agree. I think I've got like 4 or 5 stories that I think are really, really, really good. Maybe like 2 or 3 that are like exceptionally good, or at least that I find I just really enjoy. This is one of the top.
So before we get into some of the specific stories, I have one other sort of general
please.
Comment and kind of question for you on your opinion. So the people that populate the Mos Eisley Cantina in the movie, my impression is that George Lucas just kind of threw a bunch of people that just happened to be on set, costumes that they found around. Like there's the spacer that's randomly just wearing like an astronaut's outfit. There's, the demon looking character, who we have a story from in this. And so it's interesting that you're taking something where it's kind of random and they're just using in the movie whatever you have on hand to make this sort of diverse, weird looking, alien, foreign environment, right? But then you're trying to then build a story that has to stay true to that randomness and come up with a logical reason for why there's a guy with like a space helmet in the cantina. And that concept doesn't always work, of being forced to create this backstory for things you didn't plan for originally. And my other thought was that many of the stories that get featured in here are of, I didn't count how many, but it may be close to half, are humanoid.
Yeah.
Human characters that have recognizable, like, human faces, human features. In fact, they don't even have illustrations. I'm assuming because, like, the actors don't have the rights to, like, reproduce an illustration of the actor's face. And I'm surprised with so many other distinctly alien, weird-looking creatures being in the cantina scene, like the giant grasshoppers, why they didn't choose more of those random kind of aliens to feature, and why more of the humanoid. Is it easier to tell a story that the audience can relate to when it's a human character as opposed to an alien one? I was somewhat disappointed that there weren't more of just those random aliens that were in there.
I think that's a part of it. This book, I think, makes it kind of clear that when the stories become more and more alien, they feel less and less like Star Wars. And so, I think I was trying to think of the story about was it the Devorian? I think it is. Oh no, not the Devorian. I can't remember. But the guy who's always talking about soup. which he by that he just means brains.
Yeah, the pipe smoker.
The pipe smoker, right?
Donick Jericho?
Yeah.
Who, I forget his species, but...
It's escaping at the moment. But his character looks like he's normal. But once we enter his head...
And Zati.
Yeah.
And Zati.
Once we get into his head, right, he stops being fully human for us. And certainly we get stories about even less humans in this. And I think that story, which I actually kind of find interesting, even though it's not really a complete story in any way for me, it just gets us so far away from anything really part of this universe in terms of the kinds of story that you would expect, even if we're doing something kind of horrific. And so I think, what we would get if we got the giant grasshoppers as like an example, or some of the other very alien looking things, is either stories that are even more alien than this to maybe a degree to where how do we really connect here? Or they weirdly humanize them to a degree that kind of the book technically does with characters that are less humanoid. And I think I think you end up with a weaker set of stories. If you overly humanize them, why are they giant grasshoppers? And if they're too alien, then are we really doing Star Wars as we think of them? And I don't know that I don't know. I don't know that we would be... I don't know that you could have a whole book where half the stories are like all the super alien-ish ones. I think you'd end up with a work that feels like it's part of another universe. But that's my thought. I don't know. I could be wrong.
I mean, I guess you're somewhat limited from that idea that the Empire is racist, right?
There's also that.
It's human centric by the Emperor's, purpose.
Yes.
And so you're limited to what you can tell then. And even the Republic... or the rebellion, is founded by pretty much only humanoid, at least originally, a lot of humanoid characters. There's a Mon Calamari, right? But how many other...
a whole lot of worlds are part of the rebellion. We just don't really get that in the first film.
Get to see that. But the original, senators that do it, it's like, Padma, Bail, Mon Mothma. It's like a bunch of humanoid ones, or humans, effectively, right?
Yes, but it's probably worth pointing out that some of their biggest supporters were not human peoples, and they were immediately oppressed and nearly wiped out by the Empire. Yeah,
that is true. Yeah.
So especially in old canon,
so that scrunches how many stories you can tell that feature this war between the Empire and Rebellion. Then. Yeah,
and which is also probably why it's great to set it in Mos Eisley, because it's on Tatooine, which is at the Outer Rim and is not the Empire's there, kinda, but they don't really care about. The only reason Mos Eisley is important is because it's where the droids end up. That's it.
Money. Well, for the Empire.
Yeah. Well, yeah, for the Empire, right? Yeah. So it makes sense as a world where we can see some of these characters with a lot of different motivations, which we wouldn't see inside the Empire. And if we go to the Rebellion, then really, what stories do we have? We've got stories of people working to keep the rebellion funded, or people fighting in the rebellion. There's only so many kinds of stories you can really tell there. Whereas this, it's we've got smugglers and thieves and bounty hunters and weird creepy guys that constantly talk about soup and evil mad scientist doctors and moisture farmers, which is another story I really, really liked.
Yes, that was excellent.
We also have
people looking like what planet they came from, because they came out of the cocoon and they don't know.
No, that's
and
true.
They're just
that
trying
was
to
cool.
survive, right?
That was so
I really
cool.
love that story.
That was cool.
That was one of my favorites.
Yeah. I love that. What am I? And that. Yeah, I like that a lot. And we get a story about jizz in this.
Yes, it starts with jizz. Actually,
it really does start with jizz. It's really off to the races right from the start. A whole lot about jizz in this. Yeah, fluid, very, almost
spontaneous.
Spontaneous, yeah, spontaneous jizz, fluid jizz, a little bit, almost melodic jizz, you could say. And, there's a musicality to the jizz.
I guess most jizz is melodic. If it were amelodic, it probably wouldn't be characterized as jizz.
Well, it depends how you play your horn.
Well, that's true. Well,
right? Yeah.
Correct. But there's a lot of instruments for jizz as well.
They're true, right? And like this book, right? Even though we mostly get jizz from Bish, right? We do get, implications that other people could. And not just that, multiple characters in this book really appreciate the jizz that we get.
Did one of the characters use a jizz box?
I think so. There's one character that like really loves it, who's the guy who's the massacre, the guy who commits the massacre, and he like isn't he the guy that follows the jizz band around, or is that a different character? Yeah. Right?
No, I think that was the one.
He follows the jizz around wherever he can find it.
The demon type guy, yeah.
So for those that don't know what we're doing, if you thought we were talking about dirty things, that's because you're a filthy animal, you perverts. We were talking about what the guys on the front of the book play.
The modal nodes.
Yeah. Apparently, George Lucas sometimes was drunk. And he decided that his obviously jazz blues-inspired music, instead of just calling it jazz or some other weird word, he just changed the letter.
Lucas that decided this?
I don't know what Lucas was, right? But anyway, jizz is just the name of the musical style that you see them play, and they can't. So that song is jizz. Don't know what to tell you.
Yes, you can look up all the variety of jizz instruments.
Yeah. At some point, my brother's going to possibly come out of his room and wonder why I have said the word jizz like 18 times. He's going to get so confused. And in chat, I just want to... Stephen Geiger Miller says, I hate you both so much right now.
All you have to do is Google Star Wars jizz jizz instruments, and you'll find,
Yeah, I recommend doing it on DuckDuckGo, where it's very bad at giving you pornographic material, because, you might get that. Anyway.
There's another style called jats, apparently. There's also jizz and jats.
Yeah. There are also subgenres of jizz called jizz whale, abaid, and glitz. And then there's jats, which is reminiscent but different from as well. Look, guys, I don't know what to tell you. The Jizz Whaler shows up in the Return of the Jedi novelization.
Yes.
And so that's where the word jizz comes from. I don't know, guys. I don't know if Lucas did this on purpose. Anyway.
I doubt it was him.
Who knows, man. Whoever came up with that decision and got it through, I hate you. But, okay, in seriousness, can we talk about the story? We don't do weddings.
That first story?
Yeah, we don't do weddings. I like this story.
So, you liked it?
I do.
I was pretty ambivalent to it, actually. Like, not really much happened. It's, like, vaguely interesting, but not...
Well, no, but a bunch happens, right? Like... They are forced to basically like flee because their band leader is like a Figrin Don, as the guy's name. It's his band, Figrin Don and the Modal Nodes, right? Has a gambling problem, which gets them into trouble with so many different people. He's in
debt to Jabba.
Yeah.
But they run from Jabba by going to play at the cantina?
They violate their contract because Figrin is obsessed with money and gambling. And our main character is not Figrin, right? So the Modal Nodes are our main character. Oh god, what is his name? The name is now escaping me now. Oh god, it doesn't matter. Whatever. But anyway, so Figrin's gambling problem means that like when they get that option, right, to go, we could go to Lady Valerian's place and like make some more money. He does not think at all about violating the contract with Jabba. He thinks they're just going to get away with it, right? But his other folks in the band are like Doik and so on. Doik, what a great name. Are telling him, you're an idiot. Stop what you're doing. And it, of course, goes horribly wrong because Jabba, like, calls in the fuzz, the Empire, on Lady Valerian.
The wedding does not go well.
It does not go well. The wedding goes pretty horrifically. Yeah. Doik is the guy I'm talking about because he's the main. He's a Biff, the weird alien guys with the alien heads who's on the cover. Anyway, I like the story, I think, because it's, of all of the stories, it's about, like, artists being normal dudes and just trying to, like, make a living in an empire that we learn in other stories in this, like, actively despises art, right? So there's one character who's, like, follows around this artist who gives these performances, and she never tells anyone where she's going to be next, because if she does, the Empire might try to stop her, because the Empire, being a fascist system, hates artistic expression because artists will be critical, which is unsurprising. And so it's nice to get stories about, like, what are artists doing in this? Normally when we get art in Star Wars, it's just not the focus. It's the focus here. This is a band. These are musicians talking about their instruments, talking about, you know, trying to make a living and being these are like normal dudes. Most of the other characters we have professions that aren't normal dude professions. These are normal dude professions, right? And I like that because it feels very grounded and real.
That's fair.
I guess I don't have anything else to say except it's also just fun.
Yeah, I was not enthralled by it, but I didn't hate it either. I was just very ambivalent about the story. And that might just be because it was so ordinary.
Well, compared to everything else, yeah. I guess it doesn't kind of rise up. Yeah, I could see that. It is fun, though, to have, like, a guy, like, talk about the sort of musical theory of, in this case, jizz music. But, you know, it's kind of fun to, like, they're bullshitting their way through musical theory here, which I love.
Right.
In a way that, I don't know.
That's, I guess, the one thing that did prick me a little, that so much of it is invented words.
Yes.
Invented theory that just sounds strange and exotic, but doesn't really have any meaning.
That's fair.
And has nothing to relate it to. And that kind of stuff in sci-fi, it read very 1990s-ish to me.
Well, I will give
regard. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'll give you that.
And so I think that probably put me a little more off of the story than if it had been done a little differently.
That's fair.
And with all that jizz that it promised, it should have been way more exciting.
You would expected that it might have been a more titillating story, perhaps.
Yes.
Okay, because of all. Oh God, we're gonna go to hell for this. Sorry, but yeah, this show's not for children. Okay, so can we talk about A Hunter's Fate? Because this is the Greedo tale. This is the second in the piece, and as I mentioned before, right, Greedo is he's like stuck in a time loop in this book because he gets murdered in like every single story almost. The one thing I want to say here is that I found this very interesting because it paints a very different picture of Greedo, although we find out that he's a bit racist later. That's a whole other thing. But
he has some serious problems in this. I mean, he's sympathetic, but he's problematic too.
He is, but it's sort of also like his whole species is having these clan wars, and his clan is basically being wiped out and hunted down by other Rhodian clans. And, you know, his whole family is suffering as a consequence of the fact that his family didn't want to be part of this. It doesn't want to do anything with this. His father was a bounty hunter, and so to some degree you can read this as he's trying to connect with his father, who is no longer with them. And he is basically set up. He becomes like a bounty hunter, but he has like no experience. He's effectively a punk kid who's trying to prove himself. And it turns out at the end of the story, he's been set up so that a pair of Rhodians from a rival clan can have him killed. And you kind of get to the end, you're like, yeah, he's not a perfect guy or anything. He's definitely got his head moving in the wrong direction. But then it's like everybody's taking advantage of him. He has no experience at this. Han Solo plays him like a fiddle. And then he's just murdered by his own people. Everyone plays him like a fiddle.
And the other bounty hunters for Jabba.
Yeah.
But he's incredibly naive, inexperienced.
So much so.
But he's also... like, he is a punk kid, right? He's looking for an easy way out of a very troubled life. So you feel sympathetic for him because he is naive, because he's coming from such a troubled background, and you kind of want to see that underdog get out of that. But at the same time, the stupid decisions that he makes, because he ends up betraying his people too, right? They may be rival clans, but he betrays his people to the Empire, or he betrays the rebellion to the Empire, which ends up his people die as collateral damage, right? So in a way, he's making his people's situation worse in the universe,
but
through his actions, and he never really learns from that. It's. I agree. It's a really interesting story because you feel for this guy and you feel bad for what happens. But at the same time, you're like, he's made really bad decisions in his life. And it's not surprising that this has happened.
Yeah.
And so it makes you, what I liked about it so much is it makes you empathetic for a character like that who is very flawed, very failed, but you still see, like, if he had been given a better shot and somebody had actually give him sympathy or forgiveness or tried to rehabilitate him as opposed to take advantage of him, things could have gone very differently for him other than what Han ended up doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing I would say is, like, this is a thing that I found interesting about the book in general was it doesn't just give us pure heroes. In gives us characters who are making decisions that we know are the wrong decisions because there is a very clear moral center to this universe, and the Empire ain't it. And he makes decisions that sell out the people we think of as the heroes fighting the big evil empire, etc. But you also completely understand why he makes those decisions and why other characters in these stories, some of them do make similar decisions. And for some of them, it is quite literally a matter of survival. And it is sort of pointing out the social side of the battle that a rebellion really has to fight. It's not enough just to have ships and resources. You also have to have people willing to make sacrifices that could ruin their lives to protect you. And what we see over and over again is people faced with the potential that their lives will be ruined forever, deciding, I'll help the Empire, even when they know the Empire isn't the good guys. They're the bad guys. You can't trust the Empire. Multiple stories make it very clear that the only reason you work with the Empire is for your own financial gain, because at any point the Empire might decide, well, you're next now. We're going to punish you now. And multiple characters find that out the hard way.
Or you know too much.
Or you know too much, and so that's a problem. Literally one of the stories is a stormtrooper story where the stormtrooper is forced to kill a bunch of innocent people. We know who they are. And later on in that fight that we see in the film where the stormtroopers are all shooting at the Millennium Falcon, he kills his own commanding officer by shooting him in the back. And he does it because he was like, I thought that I was signing up to join the military because it was, he kind of says, like, it's going to be fun, it's going to be exciting, which is, him being naive idiot, but he wasn't expecting I was joining the military to massacre innocent people. And yeah, that's a fair point, because you probably didn't join the military thinking you were going to kill innocents and that nobody was going to get punished. But this is, of course, a fascist empire. So.
And that's why stormtroopers never hit the good guys. It's not because they're bad shots. It's because some of the stormtroopers within them are intentionally shooting each other instead.
You could also read the whole stormtrooper thing as sometimes you'll hear this about, like, World War II, where only a certain small percentage actually are like on target. I don't know how true that number is, but it's sort of like people don't really want to kill other people. That like we don't really want to do that. So, I mean, but I get that like our joke throughout this book is like all these characters that willfully kill other people all the time, but realistically, most people don't want to kill other people. That's not a thing they want.
So what about the Jawa?
What about the Jawa? Oh, you mean the Jawa story?
The Jawa story, yeah. The wants to do a mass shooting of stormtroopers.
Well, he's got good reason, right?
He does have a good reason, but did Obi-Wan kind of set him up for this to die, or did he not listen to the real message that Obi-Wan was trying to give him?
I think what Obi-Wan's message is to remind the Jawas that they're not powerless.
Mm-hmm.
Which they aren't. And
the Jawa interprets one particular way.
Correct. And that I think is the issue. Is I think Obi-Wan's in a bit of a rush at this moment because he's got a lot going on, and he doesn't think very carefully about the words that he uses here. Not reading the situation appropriately. Like it's the same thing he does with the spacer, right? Where he recognizes the spacer has like some force potential, and he like tells him something, and the spacer's like, I don't know what the hell that means, right? And has maybe an experience with the force at some point as a consequence of this, because he says something about like being pure of heart or whatever. The spacer like tries to find God, basically, I guess. I think this is a thing of you can say what things seems to be the right thing, but the mind state in which someone is in means that it might get interpreted the way that you don't want it to be interpreted. I don't think Obi-Wan wants Jek to go run out there and start a battle with the stormtroopers. I think he wants him to go back to his people and start talking about how do we resist the Empire realistically. I mean, in some way, this story is very connected, I think, philosophically to Drawing the Maps of Peace, which is the Moisture Farmer's Tale, which is, I think, the only story here where technically no character from the actual Cantina scene shows up, because the character in this, Eric Johnson, is erroneously
never shown.
Yeah,
never shown on film.
Yeah, but that's a story about a moisture farmer who is trying to create relations with the Tusken Raiders and the Jawas, because he thinks that, the Empire isn't really going to do anything for these moisture farmers out in the middle of nowhere. So we need to make connections, because otherwise we're just fighting a bunch of people who we're on terrain where they're better equipped. So why don't we try to make peace with them? And so he's trying to find ways of like redrawing the map so that the Tuskens have land that they can roam, but then there's a friendship that the Jawas can roam. The same reason. Philosophically, I think these two stories are very similar, which is, there is this potential that we don't get in the films, although we do get in the Boba Fett show, of the people living on this world can have meaningful relationships with the indigenous populations of Tatooine. And all it takes is a bit of a leap of faith. And unfortunately, it goes kind of awry, somewhat because the Tusken Raiders misunderstand it, and somewhat because the other moisture farmers make a terrible decision that ultimately brings the Empire down on it all.
Yet that one ends with still hope.
Potential
and that idea
hope.
of perseverance of it, I would say.
I found the ending a little less hopeful.
I found it more optimistic. But
I want to believe it.
Between Greedo's tale, the Jawa's tale, and the Moisture Farmer's tale, all resonated with me in terms of that tragic aspect to them.
Yes.
They're all tragedies, but the Moisture Farmer one, maybe a little more optimism to me.
I agree. Yeah, in that respect.
Also, it hit harder now because it's one that has aged really well, because it feels just as relevant now as it did then, right? It may be even more relevant in today's world.
It's also, I will note,
today's political situation.
The Boba Fett story, the Boba Fett TV show, I don't know that they did this consciously, but kind of borrows elements of this story, but makes it primarily about the Tusken Raiders. And it is Boba Fett's... You can read the story as Boba Fett's effort to teach them how to defend their territory from people with, frankly, better firepower that ultimately leads to a whole family of Tuskens basically being murdered. And Boba feels really... I would say it's fair to say he feels really bad about it. Although it wasn't his intention. And he actually, they don't really deal with the Jawas in that as much. They deal with kind of what the main character, Jensen, deals with here with the Jawas, but with the Tuskens instead, which is, I'm going to go learn about their culture, and I'm going to adopt some of their cultural practices and show respect for their culture. I love that about this story, though, with the Jawas, where... like, he starts to understand, like, why do the Jawas behave the way that they do, and why do they see things the way that they do, and he, like, actually gains, like, a lot of their respect. He brings them to a wedding, right? They invites them to a wedding, and they don't quite understand that all the stuff that's there for the wedding people to eat is
free.
It's free. And so he's like, you'd like this, like, spiced juice. Drink this spiced juice. And they're like, I didn't bring it money for this because we ain't got none. And he's like, no, it's free, bro. And, like, he has to do this with every Jawa. And he does. He does it every single one. He walks them through the same thing to make sure they get this juice. And they're so grateful for all of the time and respect that he's shown them. It's the Tuskens that are, like, the harder nut to crack. And that's because I think they're
harder
meant to
communicate with.
They're much harder to communicate with.
And they're much more defensive, and yeah.
And understandably so. Because,
I mean, they haven't, like, looked throughout Star Wars history, like, from Attack of the Clones, right? They're not treated very well by people in Star Wars, right?
Not at all. They're treated very, very poorly, unfortunately. Yeah.
All right, we have like about 10 minutes left, really. So
let's ramp through a few
more. What other
more.
story would you like to really focus on? Or
could we talk about the Hammerhead's tale?
Sure.
That's called the Sand Tender. I thought that was
that was nice soup.
No,
good soup.
No, that's not this story.
No, I'm just saying it was a good story. The Hammerhead's tale.
What? Don't eat their brains. It's weird. So this is an interesting story because the main character has been effectively banished from his home world. His people are primarily pacifists and have semi-psychic communication with sentient trees, essentially. And I thought this was a very interesting story because he's stuck between a rock and a hard place because he wants to get revenge against a very particular individual who's done horrific things to his people, but he also doesn't want to
officer of the Empire.
Yeah. And he doesn't want to lose his connection to these sentient trees, which they will refuse his touch going forward because for them, life is basically everything. Committing death is like verboten. It is not allowed. I thought this was such an interesting story because here you have a franchise called Star Wars, which has a story of a character really struggling with maintaining pacifism and not killing. It's not a perfect story, but I found it very, very interesting and kind of beautiful in a way. Also, I thought the idea of him potentially cloning the officer at the end to effectively raise him to not be evil is an interesting compromise.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I was really looking forward to the story because I always, from as a kid, I loved that character in Star Wars, the cool. Hammerhead, which apparently is an insult to them, not surprisingly to call them that. But it was one of the first Star Wars action figures I had as a kid too.
Oh,
and so I definitely was drawn, and I had heard about this story and about the character, and that ultimately he ended up, being with the rebellion. And so I was curious to read this, and I was definitely pleased by how it presented itself, because I love the theological kind of aspects to this, or the philosophical ones. It doesn't necessarily theological, but the moral quandaries that it raises.
Yeah, it's a pretty beautiful little story.
Yeah.
Should we talk about any of the ones that aren't good? Real quick.
So I mean, to some degree, I don't know if there's any that I was like, oh, this is just absolutely awful. There were a lot of the other ones I was just ambivalent about, or didn't really stick with me. We've referred to the Soups On one, the Pipe Smoker's Tale, a few times. That was one I really didn't like at all, but I appreciate for what it was doing. Like, I recognize it is interesting, and it has artistic merit, and it's a very bold story to put in a Star Wars collection, because it's almost like a mood. It doesn't have much of a plot. It's more of like a mood or a character kind of piece, a literary experiment, which you wouldn't expect to find here. I found it kind of annoying, but I respect the artistic value of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. It's an interesting story, but it isn't. Well, story is maybe not the right word. It's not quite a story. It's an interesting vignette of a moment, as it were. I guess we could say. Yeah, and then you've got something like At the Crossroads, the Spacer's Tale, which is fine. There's not a lot to that either. It's just kind of him trying to escape detection and using the Force ? It's a he sort of like feels like mega discount Han Solo. Like he feels like if you took Han Solo and made him appropriate for Saturday morning cartoons, or like a soap opera Han Solo. No, not even that, because soap opera Han Solo probably have demons inside him. Never mind. He just feels just very bland, I guess.
Yeah.
And I don't think the story.
The character doesn't understand himself.
Correct, and I don't know that he does.
Which is part of the reason why it doesn't work. Because Han Solo, even if you might say like he's an anti-hero or something, he gets himself, right? He understands who he is, and he might deny that really at his heart he's a good person, and he might try to show himself as being more ruthless. When push comes to shove, he starts trusting more, etc. Like the good person in him, you see it coming out. This guy's probably good, the Spacer, as well, but he's kind of lost, and he doesn't have the self-confidence and the self-assurance to make himself captivating.
Yeah, like
it's not captivating for the reader.
His biggest claim to fame is he literally just broke Han Solo's Kessel Run record.
Yes.
And that is mentioned, I think, twice in the story, and in no way comes up in any meaningful way in the story. Not at all. You do have the Devorian Tale, which is Empire Blues, which I found interesting, even though I don't think it's really a big... It's not really a fully complete story, and that's just about Kardusai Malak, who is a Devorian who worked with the Empire and committed basically atrocities, and he was forced into exile. I found it very interesting to have a character that is a monster who is kind of trying not to be anymore, but it's a story that kind of doesn't really go anywhere. It makes a connection to the first story, but that's kind of about it.
That's it. Yeah. And the Ranat's Tale.
I don't remember
really
that one.
Only it basically only fills in the gap of what happened with the Jawa. Because the Ranat is making the trade with the Jawa.
Yeah.
For the gun. And so it's really just a second side to the Jawas to fill in, to give answers that we don't necessarily need.
Yeah.
In a book that's giving answers we don't necessarily need. So it was like doubling down on that.
I agree. Then we do have Be Still My Heart, the Bartender's Tale, which, with the title, David Bischoff, thank you.
Yeah.
Which is, like, fine. It's kind of, it's neat, I guess, but it's a story, to me, it's an underdeveloped story, because his whole one of the main things of this is that Wooer, the bartender, hates droids. And at the end, he changes his mind. But I don't know that anything in the end of the story...
Does he really, though?
He does, because he goes and looks for that droid, remember?
That droid, though. But,
just that droid. But what was the inciting incident that made him change his mind? Did he get mind screwed by Obi-Wan? Like, I don't... It
was that the droid had something he needed, right? To be able to make that special cocktail for Jabba.
I mean, the most interesting part is the chemistry part, which is apparently... This is also when we find out that Greedo's kind of racist against humans, or speciesist, or whatever you want to use the phrase, because he hates humans and thinks humans shouldn't be bartenders, which, dude, we've been doing it for, like, centuries, my friend. And I found it... The most interesting part is that Wooer is, like, actually kind of a chemistry genius, and he's been making some sort of liqueur for Jabba that tastes like rotting bodies or whatever, which in this case is because they put Greedo's body inside the concoction, which, in fairness, I get why it feels rather cathartic in that moment for Wooer, but I found weirdly disturbing now that I know poor Greedo's backstory.
I think it was this point in reading the collection where it was like, the phrase in the Star Wars universe has to be now like kicking a dead Greedo instead of kicking a dead horse, right? Like, how many times are we gonna like?
Yeah. We haven't mentioned. Trivia Matt said a while ago in chat. This is, I think, one of her favorite stories. Which is Nightly, the Lover's Tale, which is a story. By the way, this was made into a full cast audio dramatization, which I desperately want, by the way. I want to hear somebody dramatize this. This is about Felteburn Travag, who is a Gotal, who meets a woman named Mayum Oneth, who is a female Hnemph. He is warned multiple times he shouldn't pursue any sort of relationship, especially not love, but he's enamored by her feminine scent, as it were, and is unfortunately discovers the hard way that the Hnemph, they have a very sharp tongue, and they eviscerate the males when they're done mating, owing to the fact that apparently in the ecology of their species, more males are born than females, and females are protected. And men basically seek out true love for most of their lives, and then get one night of passion and then are immediately eviscerated. So they're basically even more screwed up versions of a praying mantis, which it's a fun story, but I'll be honest, I got a little tired of hearing him talk about being sexually attracted to her and like sniffing her scent. I get it, they were trying to go for like hyper souped up like animals in heat kind of thing, but it got a little gross after a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the concept of this one, but he was just a little too much.
Creepy. Yeah, he's creepy.
Yeah. It reminded me, was it in the horror anthology that we watched the movie where the witches take revenge on that guy? Or was that another horror anthology movie that I saw?
It might be a different one. I don't think that's in the one we watched for the blog.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Trivia Matson chat does say that he wasn't enamored. He was planning to take advantage of what he thought was her innocence. He got what he deserved.
Yes. Yeah.
I
think he was enamored in terms of she was manipulating him, but the story makes it clear that he was, even independent of her, he was manipulative. He was just a terrible person, just in all walks of life.
Fair enough.
And so I like, again, the concept of this and that twist, but he was a
gross.
Little too,
gross. Yeah. Let's see. Then we get Play It Again, Figure Dan, which is this is by AC Crispin. I'll be honest, I don't remember this one. The Tale of
this is the one.
Oh, it's the one where he doesn't know what he really is.
He doesn't know where he's from, what he really is, comes out of his cocoon. It's a cute story. There wasn't much to it, but I found that sort of biology interesting of a species coming out of its cocoon and having to, figure out where he's from and what his origin is. He's such a pleasant, likable character. You can't help but kind of enjoy the story. And he has the sort of protective parenting kind of aspect on Cabe. Who and Cabe's just trying to figure out her life as well. So it was an interesting story of two people that were into criminal activities but are good people.
Yeah. You're right. It's I would say it's a story where there's an idea here that it needs to be in a longer story.
Yeah, I could. It's about finding yourself and finding a home, finding a purpose in life to some degree.
You could do it as a Star Wars adventure.
It could have. Yeah, it could have been more, but.
Yeah, but, it is an anthology. So we got that one. We already talked about Dr. Death, and he got what he was deserving. And then the only one we've not talked...
The Tonica sisters.
Yeah, the Tonica sisters. Hammer
the Hammer Tong.
Hammer
time.
Kind of hammer time. Do. Can't touch it. Anyway,
which is I'm surprised Timothy Zahn writes such good Star Wars.
Yeah.
This was not that memorable.
I agree that they are interesting characters. It's fun that they disguise themselves and they're, all this, but it's kind of
needs to be longer.
It needs to be longer for the story to really, really work. And they're trying to get top secret information and then sell that information. That happens in a lot of stories, by the way, where characters are selling information to other characters and haggling. And
Zahn's trying to tie it into other Star Wars novels, I guess.
Well, specifically the Death Star, because this is the one where they meet up with Ridge, who is working for the Rebel Alliance, and they basically find out one of the things that they've freed, we'll call it freed, happens to be these parts to the Death Star 2's laser system. And so he wants it because understandably, if they're building a second Death Star, not good, they're going to need it. So, it's just kind of it's fine. It's not a terribly memorable story. Yeah, the most memorable story that is not great is the Soup Man story, because it's creepy as hell to have a guy constantly talk about wanting to slurp people's brains. And that's, I think, probably for the best. If you're going to have a story that's not terribly great, at least be memorable because it's weird as hell. Yeah. We've done it. We've talked about all the stories.
Any final thoughts?
Look, it's fine. There's Star Wars fans who say this sucks. And, some of the stories aren't good, I would say. They're not great stories. They're, fine. And some of them are really not very much stories. Overall, it was an enjoyable experience. I enjoyed it. I liked several of the stories. Some of them are honestly really, really good stories. The last story in particular in this collection is just, honestly, I would describe it as beautiful. It's a beautiful little story. It feels very emotional and intense, and I really, really enjoyed that. So that's kind of where I feel with this is it's any anthology where we're all trying to tell stories with the same rough limiting factor, which is only characters from this moment in time. And apparently they got the directive. Pretty much all the stories have to have a Cantina direct connection in the story. I think that they did the best they could do with that limitation. It's a suitable anthology. I enjoyed it.
It's an anthology through and through, because just glancing through, out of curiosity, what other people thought of this, a lot of people seem to agree in that, some people kind of put down on it, or say, some of them are, there's a few that are really great. Yeah. There are a few that are terrible, and then a lot of them are kind of just all right. But then when you look at which stories people say are great versus terrible versus kind of ho-hum, everybody's got different opinions.
That's true. Yeah.
Things that I felt mediocre, people were like, that was the best story in the collection. And so I think, like with any anthology, you're going to find things that just agree with you more than others.
Yeah.
I think it's also interesting that they've kind of revised this Tales idea with the newer novels of the canon, where they put out a series of collections from a certain point of view.
Yeah.
I read the one for the original Star Wars. I haven't read the one that they put out for Empire or for Return of the Jedi yet, but I like that they've sort of revisited that and do it again, not just within the scene, but from multiple characters, multiple parts of the story, telling a character telling the story from another point of view, from a secondary character that you might only briefly see.
Yeah, that's fair. So the thing we'll note is, I think I mentioned at the top of the show, but the next time we do an episode of this will be in the modern canon, as it were. And the book selected for that, I don't know, people can go suggest stuff to us if they would like to. So, yeah, I'm happy to take suggestions. So if you'd like to do that, and you'd like to let us know what you thought about this episode, maybe you read the book and you want to send us your mini review, cool beans. There are a bunch of different ways you can do it, but the main one is skiffyandfanty@gmail.com. Please do that. You can also, if you're on the Discord for Patreon supporters, you can also go there and tell us what you thought or argue with us a little bit if you are so inclined. We're on Blue Sky, Threads, Mastodon, YouTube, and more places. You can go to skiffyandfanty.com/skiffythings if you want to find all of those links, or it's just Skiffy and Fanty pretty much anywhere that matters. It's easy enough to find us. This show will always be, barring future technical difficulties, because we had some this time, always be live on Twitch at twitch.tv/alphabetstream, 7 p.m. Central on Fridays. And so you can join us for whatever it is you like. If I get this up in time, Torture Cinema is coming up at the end of March. So yay, yay, yay. And as always, if you like what we do, you want to support this show, help us pay for hosting, and occasionally when we have to buy a book that we didn't own before, things of that nature. Although I don't know why I held the book up, because I already owned this book. But if you get the idea, please, patreon.com/skiffyandfanty. Let folks know about us too. We're trying to reach more ear holes. Especially since I assume we didn't get nominated for a Hugo Award. Anyway, I'm fine. Oh my god, the cat actually got really upset by that, so I should stop. All right, you can find me, ShaunDuke.net, ShaunDuke.net/DukeThings if you want to find me on socials. And then I am also twitch.tv/alphabetstreams, Wednesday, Sunday, 6 p.m. Central. So there you go. And Daniel, where can folks find you?
You can find me at Reading 1000 Lives on Blue Sky, reading1000lives.com, my blog of reviews. And the Skiffy and Fanty blog for reviews as well.
All right. As required by the Skiffy and Fanty bylaws, I must make this happy. And so mostly I want to do this by making Daniel uncomfortable. So I'm going to do that, and you're just going to have to deal with it. Daniel, this whole time I've been thinking about your soup. Your delicious, noodly soup. I really want to taste your soup, Daniel. No, your actual soup. You made chicken noodle to share with everybody.
Oh, yes. I made matzo ball soup.
I'll have that. I'll eat your soup, Daniel. All right. And on that note, happy ending.